Open the door, Mr. Walker. Your wife is under arrest. The pounding shook our front door so hard I thought the glass panes might shatter. It was the kind of pounding you hear in cop shows when they're about to ram the thing off its hinges. Except this wasn't TV. This was my front porch. It was just after sunrise, the morning light still soft, the air cool. Sarah and I had been up for maybe 20 minutes. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee, standing in the kitchen, still in my worn flannel robe and socks. I froze, mug in hand, staring toward the sound. The pounding came again, harder, more urgent. "Daniel Walker!" a voice barked, sharp, commanding, too loud for this quiet street. "Step outside now!" I glanced at Sarah, who had just come down the hallway, tying back her dark hair. Her eyebrows rose slightly, as if to say, "What now?" I set my coffee on the counter and moved toward the front door. Through the side window, I caught a flash of dark blue, uniforms of a sort, and movement. 4 men stood on my porch, broad-shouldered, wearing tactical pants, black boots, and dark navy shirts with big block letters stenciled across the back in white. HOA Inspector. HOA Inspector? I squinted. The shirts looked like they'd been ordered from one of those novelty uniform websites. Cheap polyester, shiny under the morning light. Still, the effect might have fooled someone half asleep or someone who didn't know better. They stood in formation, 2 in front, 2 behind, like they were trained for an entry. Sunglasses hid their eyes. One of them, the tallest, rested a hand on his hip where a sidearm hung. I opened the door just enough to keep the chain in place. "What's this about?" The tall man in front stepped forward, and my stomach tightened when I saw his face. Greg Morrison, my neighbor from across the street. Greg and I had exchanged a lot of words over the past year, some friendly, most not, but seeing him here dressed like a tactical officer was something new. He wore wraparound sunglasses even though the sun was barely up, a dark ball cap pulled low, and that smug little half smile that made you want to shut the door on him. "Step aside, sir," Greg said, his voice low and heavy with that false authority he loved to put on. "We have official reports of a code violation and a potential security breach. Your wife needs to come with us for questioning." I stared at him. "Questioning? By the HOA?" Greg's smirk widened, and he tilted his head just slightly toward the men behind him. "Neighborhood safety isn't a joke, Mr. Walker. Now get her out here. We can do this the easy way, or the hard way." Behind him, one of the so-called inspectors shifted his weight uncomfortably. Another glanced at the street, maybe to see if any of the neighbors were watching. The sun was creeping higher now, and I could see Mrs. Jenkins down the block peeking through her curtains. Footsteps sounded behind me. Sarah stepped into view, calm as ever. She was wearing her dark gray workout jacket, the one with the silver piping along the shoulders, and fitted black pants. She walked to my side, looking out at Greg and his crew. Greg straightened slightly. "Ma'am, you're coming with us. Now." Sarah's voice was steady. "Do you have a warrant?" That one word seemed to throw him off balance for a fraction of a second. What?" "A search warrant. An arrest warrant. Any legal documentation whatsoever." She tilted her head slightly, her tone polite but edged with steel. "Or, are you just out here playing dress-up this morning?" One of the inspectors coughed into his hand, clearly trying not to laugh. Another looked away, as if embarrassed to be there. Greg's jaw tightened. "I don't need a piece of paper to keep this neighborhood safe," he said, his fingers brushing the butt of the pistol strapped to his belt. The holster looked professional, but the gun... I'd seen enough real sidearms to know this one wasn't standard issue. Sarah didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on his, and in that moment, I saw the shift. Her posture straightened almost imperceptibly, her shoulders squared. And that calm expression, the one I'd seen when she handled tense situations before, settled over her face. Greg had no idea he'd just walked into a fight he couldn't win. "Daniel," Sarah said without looking at me, "why don't you call the sheriff's office and ask for the duty sergeant? Tell them we have 4 men impersonating officers on our front porch." Greg's lips curled into something halfway between a sneer and a snarl. "You're making a big mistake." Sarah's voice was cool. "No, Greg, the mistake is yours." For a heartbeat, the only sound was the low hum of the neighbor's air conditioning unit. Then, from somewhere down the street, came the faint click of a camera shutter. Someone was taking pictures. I had no idea then that this would be the first domino in a chain of events that would tear open the quiet life we'd built and drag us both into something far bigger and far darker than a petty neighborhood dispute. 2 years earlier, the idea of a morning like that, men in fake uniforms pounding on our door, would have sounded absurd. Back then, Sarah and I were chasing something simple, peace and quiet. We'd spent over a decade in San Diego proper. I was a civil engineer, working long hours on big construction projects. Sarah, well, as far as anyone knew, she was a private security consultant. It was the kind of job description that satisfied curiosity without really answering anything. Our friends accepted it, our neighbors accepted it, and I never questioned it, at least not out loud. By our mid-40s, we were both worn down by the city, the noise, the traffic, the sense that we were constantly rushing from one thing to the next. Oakwood Heights seemed like a slice of what we'd been missing. It was a planned community just far enough from the city to feel separate, but close enough for me to commute without losing my mind. Tree-lined streets, tidy lawns, neighbors who waved from their porches, the kind of place where kids rode bikes until dusk, and people left their front doors unlocked. We moved into a 2-story Craftsman at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. The backyard had space for Sarah to set up her workout area, and the garage was big enough for my tools and workbench. The first few weeks felt like a second honeymoon. We hosted a small cookout, met the folks next door, and started our evening habit of walking the loop around the neighborhood just before sunset. That's when we met Greg Morrison. At the time, Greg was the picture of a friendly neighbor, tall, fit, mid to late 30s, with a clean-cut look and a ready smile. He told us he was both a local police officer and the neighborhood safety chair for the HOA. I didn't know if that was an official title, but he carried it like it was. In those early days, he was downright helpful. He came over our second week to help me fix a leaking water pipe in the garage. He complimented Sarah's backyard landscaping, said she had an eye for detail. He even invited us to a weekend barbecue where he introduced us to the rest of the block as the model couple. If Greg was in uniform, he'd wave from his driveway as we passed on our walks. His presence, and that black and white police cruiser parked out front, seemed to give the street an extra layer of security. Neighbors talked about how lucky we were to have real law enforcement living among us. For a while, it was exactly what we wanted: quiet, safe, predictable. The first sign of trouble came about a year in, when we decided to replace our old wooden fence. The boards were warped and splintering, and frankly, it was an eyesore. We wanted something sturdier, something that would give Sarah more privacy for her work, which, in my mind, was still just security consulting. After checking the city ordinances, getting the property lines surveyed, and pulling all the necessary permits, we hired a contractor to put in a 6-foot wrought iron fence. We were well within our legal rights. City code allowed fences up to 8 feet. But the day the work started, Greg's behavior shifted. The waves stopped. The friendly conversations evaporated. He started appearing in his front yard, arms crossed, watching the crew work. His wife, Linda, began hurrying past us on her dog walks, avoiding eye contact. One evening, Greg came to our door. He was wearing a dark polo with a little badge-shaped patch on the chest. Not quite a police uniform, but close enough to signal authority. "Mike," he said, he always called me Mike for some reason, "would you consider lowering that fence to 4 feet? It's blocking my view of the street from my kitchen window." I told him politely that we valued our privacy, especially since Sarah often worked from home and handled sensitive calls. "I understand," he said, his smile tightening. "But as a representative of the HOA, I think we should prioritize community harmony over individual preferences." It was the first time he had mentioned his HOA role like it carried real power. Up until then, I'd assumed neighborhood safety chair meant planning the block party and maybe coordinating Halloween decorations. I remember closing the door after he left and feeling a small, uneasy knot in my stomach. At the time, I told myself it was nothing, just a neighbor with a strong opinion. But in hindsight, that was the moment the foundation started to crack, the first hint that beneath Greg's polished, helpful exterior was something harder, colder, and a whole lot more dangerous. It didn't take long for that uneasy knot in my stomach to prove itself. Less than a week after Greg's visit, I found an envelope in our mailbox that made my heart sink. Heavy paper, embossed law firm letterhead, the kind of thing you don't ignore. Inside was a formal notice. Per the bylaws of the Oakwood Heights Homeowners Association, the fence currently under construction at your properties is in violation of community aesthetic standards. Failure to comply with HOA directives will result in fines of $500 per day, effective 30 days from the date of this notice. I read it twice, the legalese crawling like ants across my vision. Sarah was in the backyard when I showed it to her, mid-workout. She was wearing her usual dark athletic gear, hair pulled back, not even breathing hard after what looked like an intense set of burpees. Her eyes flicked over the page once, and she shook her head. "They can't do this," she said flatly. "We have the permits. We're in full compliance with the city." Her tone wasn't defensive. It was certain. Like she already knew every rule, every angle. Still, I wasn't about to pick a fight with a law firm without checking the facts. I called the number printed at the bottom of the letter. The receptionist on the other end sounded puzzled. "I'm sorry, sir, but we have no record of your address, and we definitely didn't send any notice regarding a fence." "So, this is a forgery?" I asked. There was a pause. "If someone used our firm's name without authorization, that's a federal offense. Could you email me a copy of the letter?" By the time I hung up, my hands were shaking, partly from anger, partly from the cold realization that this wasn't just Greg being petty. This was calculated. That night at dinner, Sarah was quieter than usual. She'd step outside between bites to take phone calls, speaking in a low tone I couldn't quite catch. I asked if it was work-related. She gave a tight smile. "Just complicated," she said. "Nothing I can go into right now." Over the next week, the neighborhood's mood toward us began to shift. People who used to wave now crossed the street. Mrs. Patterson from 2 doors down, who had once brought over homemade cookies, wouldn't meet my eyes. Then the notes started showing up, slipped under our windshield wipers, taped to the mailbox, tucked into our front door frame. They were polite, almost syrupy in tone. "We'd appreciate it if you'd work with the community for everyone's benefit." One was less polite. "Outsiders don't understand how good neighborhoods operate. Different handwriting each time, different paper, but the message was the same." Sarah noticed, of course. She noticed everything. She started spending more time in the backyard, on the phone, speaking in what I can only describe as tactical language. Not military jargon exactly, but deliberate terms I'd never heard her use before. I began seeing her differently. Little things that had always been there, but I'd never connected. How she'd automatically choose the seat in a restaurant with a clear view of all the exits. How her movements were always economical. Efficient. How she could size up a stranger in under 2 seconds. Greg, meanwhile, wasn't just content to spread rumors. He escalated. One Saturday afternoon, he organized what he called an emergency HOA meeting right on the sidewalk in front of our house. Nearly 20 neighbors showed up. Greg had a freshly printed sign propped against his folding chair. "Neighborhood Security Chairman." He stood up, gesturing toward our partially finished fence like it was a crime scene. "As you can see," he said loudly, "the Walker family has refused to comply with community standards. This isn't just about aesthetics. A fence this high could hide suspicious activities from street view." A few people nodded, others glanced at each other uncertainly. Then he dropped the bomb. "I've conducted a background investigation on our new neighbors," he announced, looking straight at Sarah through the window. "Sarah Walker works at a classified facility, and her exact job description is marked confidential. For all we know, we could be living next to people who pose a threat to national security." There was a murmur through the crowd. A few people stepped back. I stood at the window beside Sarah, my fists clenched. "He can't do that. He can't just—" "Oh, he can," she said quietly, "but he just made the biggest mistake of his life." Her voice was calm, but I could see the shift in her eyes, the same shift I'd see again later, on the morning Greg showed up with his so-called HOA inspectors. Back then, though, I still didn't fully understand who I was married to, or how prepared she was for what was coming next. After that so-called emergency meeting, the temperature in Oakwood Heights changed fast. Not the weather, the atmosphere. When we first moved in, we couldn't walk the loop around the block without a half dozen people waving or stopping to chat. Now, Conversations dried up mid-sentence when we approached. Eyes shifted away, smiles thinned or disappeared entirely. I'd grown up in small-town America. I knew what it looked like when gossip started to take root. And Greg wasn't planting seeds. He was broadcasting them with a megaphone. One afternoon, I caught him in his driveway, talking to Mr. Callahan from 3 houses down. Their conversation stopped the moment I stepped outside to get the mail. Greg clapped Callahan on the shoulder and said something in a low voice. Callahan gave me a stiff nod, then walked away without another word. By the next week, the friendly notes began turning up again, tucked under our windshield wipers, taped to the front door. We'd appreciate it if you worked with the community for everyone's benefit. Maybe lower the fence and we can all get along. They were still written in different handwritings, which told me Greg had other people doing his dirty work. Sarah collected each note in a Ziploc bag and filed them away in her office. She didn't say much about them, just slid them in, labeled the bag, and put it in a box that was already half full. If the cold shoulders and anonymous notes were the soft tactics, the next phase was the hard push. On a Wednesday night around 9, I heard voices outside. Not the casual murmur of neighbors, but the purposeful tone of people on a mission. When I peeked through the blinds, I saw Greg talking to 2 men I didn't recognize. They were pointing toward our house, gesturing to the side yard, then nodding like they'd just agreed on something. The following evening, as Sarah and I were cleaning up after dinner, there was a sharp knock at the door. Not pounding, not yet, but firm enough to raise my hackles. When I opened it, Greg was there in that same dark polo with the fake badge patch. His arms were crossed, his smile polite but paper-thin. "Evening, Dan. Just wanted to remind you about Saturday morning's neighborhood safety check, HOA protocol. We'll be conducting inspections to make sure everyone's in compliance." I kept my hand on the door. "Is that an actual HOA policy or something you just made up?" Greg tilted his head. "I think you'll find it's in everyone's best interest to cooperate. Refusing inspection sends the wrong message." That night, Sarah and I sat in the living room, the TV on low. She was scrolling through something on her phone. Her brow furrowed in that way I'd learned meant she was concentrating hard. "He's escalating," she said finally. "I noticed. Saturday's not a safety check. It's an intimidation play. He's going to show up with his little crew and try to manufacture some violation." I leaned forward. "So, what do we do?" She looked up from her phone, her eyes steady. We let him come, but I'll be ready." 2 days later, the inspection came earlier than scheduled. It was 2 a.m., the power cut out first. Every light in the neighborhood blinked off, leaving the street in heavy, unnatural silence. Then came the crunch of boots on gravel, the low murmur of voices, and the sharp metallic click of a gate latch. When I peered through the curtains, my first thought was SWAT team. 4 figures in tactical pants, boots, and navy blue shirts. But the words printed in big white letters across their backs made me blink twice. HOA Inspector. They even had black ball caps, earpieces, and clipboards. As if the clipboards made them official. The effect might have been comical if it weren't for the handguns strapped to 2 of their hips, and the fact that they were on my property at 2 in the morning. Greg led the pack, a flashlight in one hand, sweeping the beam over our windows. He stopped at the front porch and knocked, hard. Sarah was already standing at the top of the stairs, fully dressed, her posture straight and alert. She didn't look surprised. "Stay here," she told me quietly. "I'll handle this." And the way she said it, it wasn't a request. It was an order. Greg's knock wasn't the polite kind. It was the kind meant to wake the dead. 3 sharp, booming raps that echoed through the darkened house. "HOA inspection," he barked, loud enough for half the block to hear. "Open up!" Sarah didn't rush. She walked to the front door like she was heading into a meeting she'd already prepared for. Calm, measured steps. I followed a few paces behind, my pulse thudding in my ears. She flipped on the porch light. The sudden flood of light illuminated 4 men in those dark navy shirts with HOA Inspector printed across their backs. 2 had clipboards tucked under their arms. 1 was holding a mag light like it was a baton, and Greg, standing front and center, had his hand resting casually on the pistol at his hip. Sarah unlocked the deadbolt, but didn't open the door all the way. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Greg's mouth curled into that practiced smirk. "We've had reports of unusual activity on your property.